Hi folks, with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this radio audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the revolutions that have occurred. So, I mean, we're talking the French Revolution, well, pretty much any revolution, I guess. It's been where the people in whatever organizational structure they have risen up against hereditary aristocrats. And it could be, royalty in the case of, kings and queens, or it could be simply a government by hereditary aristocrats that have handed down their titles over many, many hundreds of years. And the people have risen up against. Now, some of those revolutions have sort of been managed and transmuted into just extending the franchise and giving more rights to people. For example, in Britain, say in the 1830s, the aristocrats, and really the aristocrats were in charge at this point. The king was really on the way to becoming a figurehead, or the monarch. And so they decided that, well, we need to accommodate the mob. We need to accommodate the rising industrial middle class, because this was the Industrial Revolution. So they extended the franchise, and between 1830 and 1890, the franchise was extended from sort of roughly 10%, give or take, of the population to around 85% of the male population. I say 80% of the male population, 10% of the female population. And then there was a social revolution in the world wars, where there was mass mobilization of all the resources of the nation, the people, the money, the factories, everything was mobilized in the war effort. And in return for that mass mobilization, the people demanded and got universal franchise by, I think it was the early to mid 1920s. So, and this was very much as a consequence of the social revolution that came about through mass mobilization of the people for the war effort. Now, none of these things were given by the aristocrats willingly. That in one case, it was to pacify what they were concerned might be the mob, and that they were losing control of all the organs of wealth and power. For example, the land had been traditionally the source of wealth and power, and so with this, with the Industrial Revolution, factories and ingenuity and capability and know-how became sources of wealth that competed with the land, and so the aristocrats didn't have the same level of control over that, whether it be in the financing or the actual know-how to do these sort of things. So they conceded and shared power with this middle class of industrialists and professional managers and so on. Now, with the revolutions, the soft revolutions that occur in that way, they're no less revolutions. They can involve seismic sort of upheavals in maybe done over a lesser time. For example, moving people from the land into the cities, as occurred during the agricultural revolution, and the various acts to do with allowing peasants to run their cow or their sheep or something on public land. Things like that had a big effect on people movements and where people went and their movement into the cities and so on. So it still had a revolutionary impact, if you will, but it wasn't firebrands running around with pitchforks and the like. Now, whereas the French Revolution was, the Russian Revolution is a case in point as well. So when you look at really any revolution, and we can look at the English Civil War as being a revolution where the aristocrats were fighting the royal authority. There's always been a challenge to the upward and a subsequent uprising of sorts, and even going to the extent of civil war, which the American War of Independence effectively was. It was civil war. So now today we're looking at something different, though, and this, I think, in history, as people look back, is going to be considered very, very unusual. That is, as part of the Industrial Revolution, the Scientific Revolution, and so on, by extension, there were more people that were appointed to senior, whether it be managerial roles, important roles, prestigious roles. There were more people appointed based on merit rather than whether they had, an aristocratic lineage or whether they were the monarch or so on. It didn't mean to say that the aristocrats didn't still reserve some plum gigs for themselves. They did. But with the expansion of the economy and the diverse nature of the economy into all sorts of industrial type manufacturing and services and all sorts of things, there are many opportunities for and many sources of wealth where people were appointed on merit. Now, it wasn't perfect. Not everybody was appointed on merit, but it was by and large the first society in history, other than say some small pockets in the Roman experience, but I'll come back to that in a minute. There were it's probably the first time in history where most of the people, the majority of the people in who were central to the economy in managerial type positions, they were appointed on merit, and that you could say public service examinations and so on. Now, whether you think the public service of in the very popular British TV series Yes Minister, the incumbent Sir Humphrey Appleby type characters, they were nonetheless well educated and well schooled and were largely, not always, and again not perfect, but many of them were there on some form of recognisable merit rather than affirmative action or race gender quotas or diversity, equity, inclusion stuff that we see today. So what we're witnessing now is a revolution. I wouldn't even call it a soft revolution. I think it's quite all pervasive and brutal in many ways. But what we're looking at here is a revolution that's imposed by a new elite, particularly financial and bureaucratic administrative type elite that's sort of almost merged in ideological terms anyway, an elite against merit. That they are, because while merit is the source of promotion or hiring or so on, then the elites have reduced and very limited control. If they can remove merit, then patronage, nepotism, and whether you dress it up as affirmative action doesn't really matter. Then they have control because they can appoint everybody based on whatever ideology that they want to weigh around at the time. But we're seeing a revolution against merit, directly against it. We're to the point now where merit is verging on the criminal in any Western society where the globalists are arranging mass migration of black and brown peasants from the third world. Merit is now a criminal act, and where entire human resource departments and bureaucracies and education institutions and so on have been turned over to the whole idea of DEI, ESG, affirmative action, and it's openly and brazenly now touted as the new way that if you're a high performing, high achieving, particularly if you're a straight white male, but even straight white women these days, then you're effectively an enemy of the new ideology. And if you believe in merit, then you're the equivalent of Hitler. So this is I think this is of Hitler. So this is I think this is the first time, and I've looked around to try and find other examples of it, but where there's an actual war against merit. There's a war against high achievement in terms of somebody that works hard, is industrious, conscientious, follows the rules, and so on and so forth. They're now the enemy, and it's hard to believe. Even as I'm saying, I'm thinking, how could it have got to this? But it has, and it's here, it's now, and it's been going on for in embryonic form. I think it's been going on for probably 30 plus years. But it's seriously ramped up now where it's brazenly and openly done. If you're in support of merit, you are a fucking Nazi, and that's it. And so we're seeing this for the first time in history. We're seeing this insane, incredible, almost unbelievable revolution against merit, as merit had become now no one can control merit. Merit is a bouncing ball that can go in any direction. And once you have merit, then people the forces that seek to control things and rig market, then people that the forces that seek to control things and rig markets and do corrupt backroom deals and so on, that their control is very limited if merit is the deciding who gets into the job and so on and so forth. So in order for in this instance, an international financial elite class, we need to look at the finance here as being the connecting web. Then BlackRock and that sort of thing, the connecting web. Then merit is an obstacle to their level of control. The same is free and fair elections are an obstacle to their control. Independent courts are an obstacle to their control. So they're removing obstacles to their control, and merit is key to this. And we're witnessing, I think, for the first time in history, a war against a very vicious, cruel war against merit. Now, this disproportion, of course, affects white people and to a less extent Asians. It's said, well, Asians are discriminated against, say, in Harvard or something like that. But Asians are expert at rote learning. They've got it down pat, and I've firsthand experienced this. And just to illustrate this point, and I've made it a number of times before. I was in Japan and I was in this place where they had this Japanese guy singing Beatles songs, and he had every word perfect, every sound, and it seemed that he must have spoken good English to get all this, or so I assumed. But I noticed as I can play the guitar, I noticed when I was watching him playing the guitar that he actually wasn't making guitar chords. He was just moving up and down all across the neck of the guitar, and he'd actually rote learned. I mean, this is astonishing in my view. He rote learned every sound of the song. The Beatles song Penny Lane as an example. He rote learned every sound there. So he had found some guitar position on the neck, not the proper chords, but some position on the neck of the guitar to create that sound, and then had memorized every word or the sound of the word. He didn't know it was a word. So I assumed that if he rattled off 10 or 11 or so songs and did well. I mean, it didn't sound amateurish. It sounded quite good. So I went up to congratulate, assuming he spoke. He didn't speak a word of English. He couldn't play the guitar for shit. He didn't know a musical note to save his life, but he'd been able to recreate the whole thing just through rote learning. And Asians are very, very, they learn it from a young age. They've got these huge alphabetic character sets to memorize, so that plenty of exercise for the mind in memorizing vast tracts of information. But he understood nothing. He had only rote learned it. So Asians are disproportionately good at rote learning, and this comes out in exams and your entrance to college and things like that. So that doesn't mean that they've learned. So coming back to the merit thing, it disproportionately affects white people because merit, white people that have learned and passed their exams meritoriously seek to understand what it is they're doing rather than just to recreate it or regurgitate it. And so merit is very much a white gig in that sense. And of course, it's being destroyed at pace by these international financial elites, again, BlackRock and so on, Vanguard and whatever. So this is unique in history, I would argue. Going to the Roman experience now, the Romans went through a brief period where they turned to merit, not as a replacement for aristocratic sort of heritage. That the Romans, like the British, actually were able to produce, the William Pitts and so on, were able to produce some high quality people from the aristocracy, and were able to do this on a fairly consistent basis. That's why Rome became had such a vast empire. They were the best at doing what they did on a relative basis, whether it was military organization or whether it was building bridges or roads or whatever. The Romans were very good at it, or much better than the other folks around at the time, which is why they had such a vast empire. So there was, you don't get that far without some form of merit applying. When the Roman Empire was collapsing was at the time when they turned away from merit and just went into straight hack-goon, patronage and so on. So I think we're looking again at the first time in history where there's ever been two things. where there's ever been a majority merit class in running things, as it has been in the West for some time, a majority merit class to now being directly at war against that merit class, purely on the basis that we don't want to share power with them. And the source of wealth now is going to be monopoly, finance and control, and forcing the behaviour of the citizenry. That will now be the source of wealth rather than merit, ingenuity, innovation and invention and so on. You've been fantastic today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.